pick up, first of all, on that EPA decision and the major questions doctrine and what it may indicate, not just about the EPA, but about other agencies that you're familiar with in Washington, and how far they can go with that explicit congressional authorization.
Yeah, so I think there's a very concerted effort by some on the left to try to achieve through the unelected and therefore unaccountable branches of government what they can't achieve through legislation. So whether it's the courts or it's regulators, we've seen this effort to affect policy. I see it in the Banking Committee, for instance, with the SEC. SEC attempting to impose this whole climate change disclosure regime that is completely divorced from financially material information that has historically been the guide for what has to be disclosed, and with no authority from Congress to do that. There was a major effort to have the Federal Reserve actually allocate capital away from the fossil fuel industry in order to accelerate a transition to a low-carbon economy. So I've been fighting this fight for quite some time because my argument is it shouldn't be about how quickly you think we ought to transition our economy. It's about who decides and who's accountable. In a democratic society, it has to be the people who are held accountable by the American people.
So, Senator, you know very well what the response is to that. You've heard it, I'm sure, which is the following. There are a lot of things going on in this country. It's a very complicated country with a lot of important issues. Even in the opinions that we saw today, we had the majority admit that climate is a really tough issue. Congress has not shown its propensity to get a lot done very quickly. So effectively, that's saying we're not going to do anything about it. That's what the other side would say to what you said.
Yeah, well, they might say that. They would be ignoring what we did during 2020 and 2021 when we passed several $1 trillion worth of spending and new programs in direct response to the emergency of the moment, which was the lockdowns resulting from the pandemic. And they're really, that message, that idea is basically another way of saying, you know, democracy doesn't really work. And so what we need to have is an omnipotent group of bureaucrats, and they'll be really smart, and they'll make all the decisions. That's not what America's about. And so, yeah, it's messy. You may not get the outcomes you prefer. You might have to wait longer than you'd like, but in the end, it's a democratic process that assures that the American people are actually sovereign. I think this idea that Congress isn't very effective, so let's just have a super legislative body, it's very offensive and deeply undemocratic.
So you mentioned before the Federal Reserve, something you've